Okay, so picture this. You're talking to someone and the conversation is just flowing. It's effortless, you're clicking, and it feels amazing. But then, later that same day, you talk to someone else and it's a total disaster. It's like you're speaking two completely different languages, right? Well, today in this explainer, we are unpacking exactly why that happens. We're going to unlock this secret language of connection, diving into some absolutely fascinating insights from Charles Duhigg's research on supercommunicators. And you might be surprised to learn that the high-stakes world of international espionage actually holds the exact same secrets to communication as your everyday relationships with your spouse, your kids, or your coworkers. Because at the end of the day, it all comes down to the science of how we connect.
Section 1. A failure to connect. So let's kick things off by meeting someone who, honestly, despite his chosen career, was just terrible at connecting with people. Let's wind the clocks back to 1982. There's this guy, Jim Lawler, a 30-year-old case officer for the CIA. Now, Lawler joined the agency looking for a life of meaning and adventure, and he gets sent to the farm. That's the CIA's legendary training facility in Virginia. And while he's there, he learns a pretty surprising truth. Working for the CIA, it's basically just a communications job. Seriously, the official training manual practically spells it out. A case officer's absolute main goal is to make a prospective agent feel like the officer is the literal only person in the world who truly understands them. But, well, Lawler was struggling. He gets sent to Europe, he's failing completely at recruiting anyone, and he's getting desperate, like really desperate. Eventually, he meets Yasmin. She's a young woman working for a Middle Eastern foreign ministry. Lawler wants to recruit her, but he also wants to seem, safe and interesting. So he lies. He introduces himself as this wealthy oil speculator. And they actually bond. She starts confiding in him about her deep, deep hatred for her country's oppressive government. Lawler senses his opening, and he eventually offers her this totally fake, highly lucrative consulting job. And she is overjoyed. But here's the catch. Lawler's boss tells him, look, you have to come clean before making this official. Yasmin had to know the true, potentially fatal risks of actually working for U.S. intelligence. So they're sitting there over dinner, and Lawler finally drops the act. He reveals his true identity as a CIA officer. And Yasmin's reaction? It was instantaneous, and it was a total disaster. As Lawler recounted later, she started crying, and I knew I was screwed. She literally gripped the tablecloth, shook her head, and just bolted from the restaurant. Gone. No amount of money, no promises, nothing could convince her to take that kind of suicidal risk. So why did Lawler fail? He failed because he completely missed the human element. He forced this massive cognitive mismatch. See, Yasmin thought she was having this deep, emotional conversation built on mutual trust and safety. Lawler, on the other hand, was trying to force a practical, purely transactional conversation about espionage and cash. He completely failed to connect with her on a fundamental level, and that just destroyed any chance of alignment. It really goes to show that true communication isn't some tactical script you memorize. It's a deeply psychological learned skill.
Section 2, the science of connection.
That high-stakes failure brings us to a really crucial question. What is actually happening inside our bodies when we successfully connect with someone? Let's pivot away from Lawler's disastrous dinner date for a second and look at the hard neuroscience behind why some conversations fail and others just feel like absolute magic. When we communicate well with someone, it's not just this nice metaphorical connection. It is profoundly, physically real. It's a biological phenomenon known as neural entrainment. This is the literal neurological synchronization of your brains and bodies. Evolutionary biology wired us to sync up for survival and group cohesion. So when we click with someone, our bodies react. Our pupils dilate in tandem. Our breathing matches. Our pulses sync up. We start experiencing the exact same emotions, and even the electrical impulses along our skin start to align. You know that feeling when you literally start to complete someone else's sentences in your own head? That feels wonderful because your bodies are biologically mirroring each other. And neuroscientist Bo Sievers has some brilliant research that illustrates this perfectly. When we are not neurally aligned, when we just aren't clicking with the person sitting across from us, our brainwaves behave completely differently from theirs. We struggle to communicate, and if you look at the neural patterns, they're just chaotic and mismatched. It's a mess. But the very moment we start thinking alike, when we genuinely connect, our brainwaves physically align into these remarkably similar patterns. In Sievers' studies, scientists watch what happened when people listen to a woman tell this highly convoluted, super emotional story about her prom night. At first, the listeners were totally disconnected. But as they got pulled into the narrative, their brains actively synchronized with the speaker's brain. They physically felt her anxiety, her relief, and her joy, all at the exact same time. They were literally mimicking her neural state. Sievers actually took this a step further. He ran experiments where he had groups of people watch these really bizarre, obscure movie clips, but they had to watch them completely separately. Because they were in isolation, their thoughts and their brainwaves remained totally unaligned. But then, he had them sit down together and just talk about what they had just watched. And guess what? The simple act of participating in that conversation physically pulled their totally disconnected minds into a shared neural alignment. Now, what's fascinating is that some groups aligned incredibly fast. Why? Well, because those groups happen to have a supercommunicator in the mix. And by the way, a supercommunicator is not necessarily the loudest or the most charismatic person in the room. Actually, it's just someone who instinctively knows exactly how to adjust their communication style to match the people around them. They gently guide the group's chaotic brainwaves into one single shared rhythm.
Section 3, 3 kinds of conversations.
So how in the world do these supercommunicators do it? How do they orchestrate that alignment when the rest of us are just floundering? Well, research shows that nearly every single discussion we ever have actually falls into one of 3 distinct mindsets. And these mindsets activate completely different neural networks in our brains. First up, we have practical conversations. These are all about decision-making. The core question here is, what's this really about? Think about mapping out a project timeline with a coworker. Second, there are emotional conversations. These ask, how do we feel? This is when you're venting to a friend about a deeply unfair situation at the office. And third, we have social conversations. These explore the question, who are me? This is when you're discussing office politics, group dynamics, or just how society perceives us. And the crazy part is, throughout a single natural chat with a friend, you might bounce seamlessly back and forth between all 3 of these without even realizing it. But here is where everything can go terribly wrong. Imagine you come home, you're totally exhausted, and you complain to your spouse, "My boss is driving me crazy." In that moment, you are having an emotional conversation. You just want to talk about how you feel. But your spouse? They hear a problem that needs to be solved. So they instantly enter a practical conversation. And they reply, "Well, what if you just invited your boss to lunch?" Boom. Instant conflict. You immediately respond defensively. "I'm not asking you to solve this. I just want empathy." Does that sound familiar? You're both talking, but you are having 2 entirely different conversations at the exact same time. So the absolutely crucial point here is that miscommunication happens when we speak completely different cognitive languages at the same time. It is the conversational equivalent of one person speaking French while the other is speaking Japanese, and both of them getting incredibly frustrated that the other one just doesn't get it. And this mismatch is exactly why neural entrainment fails in that marriage example we just talked about. Your brains literally physically cannot sync up if one person's neurons are firing away in the emotional network and the other person's neurons are firing in the practical problem-solving network. The biological bridge is completely broken. Section 4, the matching principle.
And that brings us to the ultimate solution. This right here is the secret weapon of the supercommunicator. How do we make absolutely sure we are speaking the same cognitive language? It's called the matching principle. This principle dictates that effective communication requires 2 distinct steps. First, you have to recognize what kind of conversation is actually occurring. Is it practical? Is it emotional? Or is it social? And second, once you know that, you must match your companion. If someone seems emotional, you have to allow yourself to become emotional too. If they are hyper-focused on decision-making and practicalities, you have to match that rational focus. And the reason this works so incredibly well is that it's not just polite empathy. It's a literal biological hack. By matching their cognitive language, you are signaling directly to their brain, hey, we are the same, we are safe, we are aligned. And that is what forces neural entrainment to begin.
Now, crucially, matching is not just mimicking. You aren't just acting like a parrot. I mean, if someone is crying, you don't just awkwardly start fake crying back at them, right? Matching is about understanding someone's mindset so deeply that you can actually share control of the dialogue. Psychologists who study married couples have found that the happiest spouses constantly match each other's affect. When one gets serious, the other gets serious. When one jokes, the other jokes. They share control. Think back to our CIA agent, Jim Lawler. Yasmin desperately needed an emotional conversation to feel safe in what was a genuinely terrifying situation. Lawler instead pitched a practical, highly transactional intelligence operation. If he had just recognized her need and matched her emotional vulnerability first, if he had shared that control, history might have played out very, very differently.
Section 5. The learning conversation.
So, how do we actively apply this matching principle in our own daily lives? How do we become super communicators ourselves? Well, we do it by aiming for what researchers call a learning conversation. This is a dialogue where your goal isn't to win an argument or dictate the terms, but to genuinely understand how the other person sees the world. And it relies on 4 key rules. First, pay attention to what kind of conversation is occurring. This is your critical diagnostic step. Second, share your goals and ask what others are seeking, so everybody knows the shared destination. Third, ask about their feelings and share your own, which builds that emotional bridge we talked about. And fourth, explore if identities are important to the discussion, which really helps you understand the social context that's shaping their worldview.
For this explainer, we are going to drill down deeply into the very first, and honestly, the most critical foundation. Rule 1. You absolutely must pause before you speak to figure out what kind of conversation your partner actually wants. Because frankly, if you misdiagnose the conversation here, those other 3 rules are completely useless. Before you even open your mouth, you need to do a little bit of mental prep work. Just ask yourself, why am I speaking right now? Are we trying to make a practical plan? Am I trying to comfort them emotionally? Or are we just gossiping about office social dynamics? Taking a brief moment to just pause allows you to enter the conversation primed, ready, and able to match. So, how do you spot the right conversation out in the wild? Well, you have to hunt for clues. Super communicators are incredibly observant. They pay very close attention to someone's energy. Are they speaking fast? Are their shoulders slumped? Are they venting about a terrible day? If so, you've got an emotional conversation on your hands. Or are they laying out analytical fox, saying things like, here is exactly what we need to execute this quarter? That's a practical conversation for sure. Or maybe they're asking, hey, did you hear what happened in the marketing meeting? Or worrying about how the team is going to perceive a new change? That immediately signals a social conversation. Once you spot that specific clue, you know exactly which cognitive language you need to start speaking. And that brings us to a final proactive thought I want to leave you with. The very next time you sit down with your partner, or you step into your boss's office, or even just answer a quick phone call from a friend, I want you to pause, just for a second, and ask yourself, what kind of conversation are you having right now? Are you both actually speaking the same language, or are you actively blocking your own neural entrainment? By simply taking a breath, hunting for those clues, and matching their mindset, you might just unlock the deepest connection you have ever had. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.